Pleasure to get up here and preach and teach. Not only you guys learn, but also I get to learn as well as I go through and read the Bible. And it always amazes me. Every time you go through and you read the same passage over and over, you always pick up something new. You always learn something a little bit different. And tonight, I want to continue on a little bit of my discussion that I had this morning in my teachings on discussing anger. This morning's Bible study that we had was discussing anger and how it goes through and it'll control us, how it'll dictate us, how it'll, lead us in a direction that we don't want to go in. And one of the great enemy of a godly man or a godly woman is anger. Now, it's not evil to be angry, okay? Think about that for a second. It's not evil to be angry. However, it's evil to allow your anger to control your motivations, your decisions, and your actions. It's something that's going to control you. It's going to dominate your feelings. It's going to dictate what it is that you do, how you act, how you perceive things, how you carry yourself. And Paul declared this in Ephesians to the Ephesian Christians. And this is in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 25 through 27, in which Bobby read to us tonight. It says, "Be angry, and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not give the devil an opportunity." Think about that. Don't give the devil an opportunity. Don't let him have those controls, those feelings that he can control you and dictate you. We can be angry and not sin. However, human anger presents Satan an enormous opportunity. Now, remember this enormous opportunity that Cain's anger provided this evil in Genesis chapter 4. Remember the story of Cain and Abel? How that anger and that wrath of him being the second-born and not having the firstborn's right, by going through and having that anger that drove him to try to deceive and deceive people as a result of it. However, it takes a truly dedicated it takes a heart truly dedicated to God's heart to prevent great anger from providing Satan this great opportunity. Now, I want to focus on one of David's heart qualities that made his heart special to God. Now, let's consider 1 Samuel chapter 25. Now, this is a good chapter if you have a chance, maybe a little bit later on, to go back and read 1 Samuel chapter 25. And I'm going to go through and discuss this chapter tonight. But if you'd like to, on your free time, go back and take a look at it. It's a pretty good read. However, I want to begin with one simple observation. Violence hardens hearts and the minds of people. Think about that. In war, people cope with so much with dying that they get used to death, right? In continual work with tragedies, people cope by getting used to suffering, right? People who work around lots of blood get used to seeing lots of blood all the time. It's just something that they see. People who work around a lot of pain get accustomed to seeing others in pain. And this process is commonly referred to as desensitizing. Now, as we go through our daily lives, especially watching the news, events that happen around us and things in the newspaper, we become desensitized to a lot of things. A lot of stuff doesn't really affect us. It doesn't wow us anymore. It doesn't, invoke any type of anger or anything else like that. We just kind of say, well, it's happened before. We're just going to move along, right? However, violence desensitizes the people to death, to suffering, to blood and pain. Now, from the death of Goliath, David was around and involved in a lot of violence. Remember after David and Goliath, the story? He became a glorious leader. He came in and he led a lot of people in the battle. Now, as violence desensitizes a person, violence becomes the acceptable way to solve these problems. Anger tempts a person to become violent as a result of it. Now, David and his troops were hiding from the forces of King Saul in the wilderness, an area south of Hebron. Evidently, they had a safe base camp in that area that they used frequently. The area is about 7 miles south of that Hebron city there. Now, as David and his men traveled to and from the camp in this wilderness area, they never posed threat to Nabal's shepherd on his flocks. Now, this was a little unusual because a lot of the fighters that would come into the area, they would see a great opportunity that, hey, we've got all these great resources. We've got flocks, we've got sheep, we've got fruit, we've got all kinds of vegetables. They'd go in and more or less pillage the area to steal it to feed the fighters to continue on. However, with David, it was a little bit more unusual. It was common for bands of thieves and martyrs to find security in this wilderness area. Now, these bands were threats to shepherds as well as flock, who were considering fair game opportunity to these violent bands. Now, David and his men treated Nabal's shepherds with respect, never looking to anything from their flocks, and protected Nabal's shepherds and flocks from these dangerous people that came along. Quite a contrast to what commonly was the situation that was there. However, during this time, it was the time that came for sheep shearing. Once a year, they go along, just like with any other part of the world, and they go through and they shear the sheep. They shave them, to be able to go through and build blankets and clothes and everything else. And this time was also a time for celebration during that time. Special workers were brought in to shear these sheep. There was a lot of food and drinks and feasting because the people were celebrating in this new type of prosperity that they had for the year. Now, it was common to thank God with the gift of prosperity. It was common to give gifts to less fortunate as an expression of your joy and your gratitude to God. Now, David, he sent 10 young men to bring a statement of blessing to Nabal and to ask for a gift. Because of that time of the year was now to celebrate. We should relate to David's expectations as a result of this. The greeting was something like, wishing Nabal a long life and best wishes for the coming year, and may it be a good one, right? He just wanted to go through and just say, hey, great job. Now, Nabal, on the other hand, was a very wealthy man. He likely had experience with dealing with bands of thieves and martyrs who threatened and attacked the shepherds and flocks continually. Maybe he knew what the forces of Saul did to the priests of Nob when they were massacred and did not want to get in the middle of this type of feud. Whatever he knew, whatever the motives were, he was greedy. He was an evil man who had no respect or appreciation for anyone but himself. He was an extremely selfish type person. However, stupidity, foolishness that he had, he insulted David's men by rejecting their greeting and showing them no respect as a result of it. Now, he would say, why should I do anything for you? I should be impressed that you follow a runaway slave. Why should I reward the likes of you? Now, David's men returned to camp and told David about Nabal's insult. Now, David told 400 of his men to put on their swords. Now, think about this. He told them to put on their swords, get prepared for battle, right? The insult deeply angered David. Now, remember previously, David was all about a soldier of God. Everything that he did was all about for God and with God's will. However, this time, he changed it a little bit. He now took that anger and made it to become selfish because of the fact that Nabal rejected him. Now, in his anger, he decided it had been a mistake to be kind to Nabal's shepherd and to take nothing from his flocks. His intention was simple. Let's just kill everyone. Let's just wipe them off the map, right? Now, however, Abigail, which is Nabal's wife, was a very unusual woman for that time. She was a lady of excellent understanding, and she was very beautiful. Her heart was incredibly open and also very approachable. Now, a servant felt free to report to her the horrible thing her husband did and explained why this was just an unjust matter. She listened to the servant and criticized her husband as a result of this. Both Abigail and the servant clearly understood the danger created by Nabal's insult. Now, David was obviously a very popular guy. He was well known about how he handled himself, how he was very successful in a lot of his battles there. Now, likely her job in shearing time was coordinating food preparation for the workers. She quickly gathered a huge gift of food, enough to load several donkeys, and sent the food and the servant in the direction that would encounter David and his men as they came to attack. She expected them to attack, which is very interesting. The food preceded her, basically led in front of her. And David would see the gift before he even saw her. She hoped the gift would soften David's anger as a result of it. Now, Abigail met David with great respect and used great wisdom. She asked David to hold her responsible for what had happened because she had failed to see his men come. She asked David to allow her gift to appease his anger and not attack Nabal. She said, "My husband is a foolish and stupid man." Now, how many here would like to say that about their husband sometimes, to represent them, right? "You are too significant, and he is too worthless for you to kill him. You are not the kind of man who takes vengeance for yourself. You let the Lord care for such matters. You fight to defend the Lord, never to defend yourself." Now think about that. She used that against him as a negotiation tactic. You fight to defend the Lord, never to defend yourself. You don't take that anger upon yourself selfishly. You use that anger to channel it to serve God. "The Lord protects you, and the Lord will make you the next king of Israel," she said. "Avenging yourself will only cause you trouble and grief. You're not that kind of man." She's convincing him, hey, don't do this. It's not worth your time. It's going to cause more problems than what it's worth. It's going to discredit your personality. Now, David saw God at work in Abigail and was extremely thankful for this. He blessed God for sending Abigail to come and stop him. He blessed Abigail for being a wise and insightful person. He was thankful that he stopped before he avenged himself, something he had never done before. He told Abigail to return home in peace. He had heard her plea and would respect her request. Now, when Abigail returned home to find Nabal feasting, celebrating and drunk, and she did not talk to him about anything. She didn't tell him about what had happened, about how he had met David in the woods and gave him a peace offering. Now, the next morning when he was sober, she told him what he did. Now, because of her actions, it seemed to cause him to have some sort of stroke or some sort of ailment as a result of it. And 10 days later, Nabal actually died. It simply says that the Lord struck him and he died, which is kind of interesting. Sometime after Nabal's death, Abel agreed to be David's wife. In this incident, I want you to note the quality of David's heart that made him a man after God's own heart. Now, David, he was a violent man of war, a man who was responsible for a lot of people's death. But David never killed to avenge himself. David only killed to avenge God's honor. He killed Goliath because Goliath defied and mocked God. Remember that with the story of David and Goliath? He killed the Philistines because the Philistines defied and worshiped an idol they called God. David refused to harm Saul, even in self-defense, because Saul was God's anointed. Defending God, fighting for the Lord, was the focus of all of David's acts of violence. Yet, personal anger generated by the insult of an evil man almost caused David to avenge himself, to kill for the sake of his own honor, that selfishness that he was tempted to have. But because of this anger, it almost caused David to do something he would never do if he had thought clearly. Now remember, in the past, David did nothing to avenge David. David did everything to honor his God. When David realized what he had almost did to avenge himself, he knew that the act was not true of who and what he was. He was also very close to behaving like an angry person who did not belong to God. He was angry. He was driven by negative emotion. He was very self-centered. He was being his own avenger, being his own instrument of justice. He blessed God for sending Abigail to stop him. Because of this, he clearly saw God working through Abigail and her wisdom and understanding. Now, one thing that I want you to take away tonight from this lesson is never let anger decide who you are. Never let anger determine what you do. Because once you let anger control you, you have lost control of yourself. Now, in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25 through 27, like we had read earlier, it says, "Be angry, and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and do not give the devil an opportunity to have of this anger. Serve God and always be justice, and always leave justice in God's hand. It's up to God to determine the fate of the unjust. But remember, only the man or woman whose heart belongs to God can actually do this." Now, I came across a passage in Romans chapter 12, verses 17 through 19, and I thought it was very applicable to this topic for tonight. Romans chapter 12, 17 through 19 says, "Never pay back evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. If possible, so far as it depends you, be at peace with all men. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave the room for wrath of God, for it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, and I will repay,' says the Lord," which is a very interesting verse. Now, the decision is yours. If you're here tonight or have the need to follow God, in which you have not done so in the previously, the opportunity is now yours to take. Water is available for baptism for the remission of your sins. If you're ready, clothing and water is already prepared for you and waiting for you to come forward as we stand and sing.
Redeemed, I love to proclaim it. Redeemed by the